Jay, everyone!
Oh my god. Oh my god. Wow, I've never been greeted like that before. I feel royal right now.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I just got it.
Yep. It's 1920, guys. It's a 1920 joke. I should say what podcast this is, though. It's Every Horror Movie on Netflix. I'm Patrick. I'm back here, as usual, with my friends Chris.
Howdy.
And Steven.
Hello.
And this week, we are gonna review and discuss the original installment in a franchise that we reviewed the third installment of so early in the history of our podcast. That film was 1920 London Fear Strikes Again, and today we're going to talk to you about 1920. But before we get to that, how have you guys been doing? What's been going on? Have you been watching any good horror shit?
A little bit.
A little bit.
A couple different things have been going on. First, I've been watching a little bit of Cold Case Files on Netflix. You guys ever watch Cold Case Files?
I've heard of it. I assume that was like an SVU Law and Order sort of thing. What is it?
It's a like a docudrama sort of thing. It's real life cases. It's not horror unless you consider people getting horribly murdered horror.
Well, you just said horribly, and you can't spell horribly without the first few letters of horror. So
yes, it's absolutely the stuff of nightmares. I mean, it's a pretty by the numbers show, but the thing that really makes it stand out to me is the production values. For what this show is, it has such good cinematography, such good visuals when they're recounting the details of these 30-year-old cases and everything. Period decor and all the reenactments. It's really phenomenal for that reason. The downside is these damn cold cases, they always play out the same way. It's 27 years later, and they either find DNA because they invented DNA technology, or someone comes out of the woodwork and tells the investigators what happened 27 years after the fact. That's the only way these cases get solved, so it becomes a little repetitive.
So, just to be clear that I understand the concept, when I heard Cold Case Files, I thought this is going to be an unsolved mysteries sort of thing, but we actually get a resolution in these cold cases.
Oh, yeah. It's about murders and stuff that happened 30 years ago or more. Usually happened in the late 70s, early 80s. And then the case was cold for 25 to 30 years, and then some brash young investigator reopened the case and said, how about we test that bag for DNA now that we can do that? And they find the killer, and they track him down. He's moved across the country. He's invariably fat and on oxygen and geriatric, and they arrest him minutes before he dies.
Wait, and is this all dramatic reenactments of this stuff happening, or are you actually seeing this happen for real?
Oh, it's all reenactments,
okay.
mixed with interviews of the actual people involved. It's like any of these other. I don't know what other show to compare it to, but
Forensic
you have
Files,
a mix of
maybe.
You have a mix of archival footage, archival photos, interviews with the actual people, and then reenactments of the stuff no one was there to witness or record.
Gotcha.
But decent show. I just wish that there were some cases where the guy would just kind of solve the case 25 years after the fact with some a new perspective, some different police work, all the witnesses mentioned this thing, what if it meant that thing, and then he goes and solves the case that way. Maybe there is a case like that, but usually it's just DNA or a whistleblower coming out of the woodwork. Gets a little repetitive.
Well, have either of you watched, on a similar note, have either of you watched the new Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix?
No. In fact, I never watched the original Unsolved Mysteries other than those compilation videos.
Well, that's going to be on Peacock if you have a few extra bucks to spare to, I don't know, have NBC's line up. I don't know why you'd want that. Probably find Unsolved Mysteries on YouTube. But The new Unsolved Mysteries is pretty interesting because we don't have the Robert Stack intro or anything, which was so moody. We don't have like the number you can call into, but it's kind of like taking the Errol Morris approach to what the show did in the first place with the very dramatic, cinematic, period accurate reenactments of these bizarre disappearances, supernatural occurrences that have physical evidence left behind but remain unsolved. I recommend it. I've watched the first couple episodes. It's pretty good.
Damn, you guys are going deep into the like quasi-reality TV this week.
Yeah, true crime, the real
crime.
Horror.
Yeah. Chris, are you mourning the loss of Chilling Adventures?
Yes, except I have still yet to catch up. Like I only watched the first season, and so next time I get in October with some free time, I'm gonna watch the rest of it, and then I will mourn. But it's still too early to mourn.
I like that you say next time you get a whole one single month of the year, and like if this October doesn't work out, you'll watch it in another year and a half.
Well, I've watched and read some stuff. I've got 3 things. It's one more than Patrick usually has. So I'm gonna go through them quickly though. Read a book that I know I told Patrick about a week ago. I read this in 2 sittings, which is rare. I've not been reading a lot during quarantine. My attention is very scattered, but I read this book called I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid, which it's billed as a thriller, but I feel like that's kind of a low-key way of marketing horror these days. It's a winter road trip novel with a young 30-something couple on the edge of breaking up from the perspective of the female partner, and it eventually turns into something pretty twisty and strange that you can't possibly predict in the final act. But man, this thing just kind of sent me through the ringer thinking about the dynamics of toxic relationships, to mental health, mental illness, and it's being made into a film by Charlie Kaufman pretty soon here. It's been cast. It may have even been filmed. Who knows with the state of Hollywood these days. But I can only imagine what added meta layers he's going to add to this already very meta book. Quite excited to see how that turns out. But I recommend it. It's only like 200 something pages. You can just breeze right through it, and it'll chill you to the bone.
I'm glad you brought that up again because we talked about it. You told me about that the other day, and I had forgotten about it, and it sounds really interesting. So I'm gonna get my hot hands on a copy of that.
Yeah, I'll let you borrow it. It's pretty good. I watched a couple of movies. One's an oldie, by which I mean it came out in November of last year. I finally got around to Dr. Sleep. The Mike Flanagan adaptation of the Stephen King sequel to The Shining. And man, the first thing I'll say is I recommend this movie. It is not perfect, but it is very watchable. There's a lot of interesting stuff in it. Don't make the mistake I did and take the shortcut. You can watch it on HBO Max, and if you pull up the movie on HBO Max and you go down to the extras, you can watch the director's cut, which is it's 3 hours.
Flanagan cut.
It's 3 hours. And I watched the 2.5-hour version, and I already felt like that might be overkill before I got into it because I just didn't know what I was going to get into. I had some problems with it, and from what I've read, the director's cut solves most of those. This is a fascinating movie because the book is a literary sequel to Stephen King's own The Shining. The movie is a sequel to both the book and the Stanley Kubrick movie, and it is utterly fascinating to see the way that Mike Flanagan finds a way to pay homage to the movie that Stephen King hated in a way that is somehow honors the book. He kind of doesn't really mention the parts of the Stanley Kubrick movie that deviate from the book, and the way he kind of uses quote unquote period details and casting. He's not doing a Star Wars Princess Leia thing and doing CGI faces. He's casting actual actors to play Shelley Duvall and Jack Nicholson and the boy who played Danny Torrance.
Really? Oh my god, I didn't know that. I feel like that's spoilers. I had no idea that they their likenesses appeared in the film.
Oh, they do, and it's seamless. Like the talent he hires, and it doesn't feel like they're really doing impressions. It's really naturalistic. But what I will say is that's the least interesting thing about this whole movie. There's a cult of kind of shine, like witches that have the shine, that travel in caravans and abduct young people and store their essences in little bottles to keep them young forever. And like that stuff, that whole kind of cult vampire element is thrilling. There's some really great performances. The woman who plays Rose the Hat, who's the leader of this cult, is just spellbinding. I think one of the great movie villains of all time after seeing this thing. It's got its problems, but check it out. Watch the director's cut.
I have wanted to see that since it came out. I missed it in theaters, unfortunately, and I'm so excited it's on HBO Max finally. I do feel some trepidation about watching a 3-hour version of a movie that already seems long, but I'll attempt to follow your advice if I've got the time and the gumption on my hands.
Oh, I can tell you if the director's cut, it's really not that much added footage when you think of it. The version I saw just flew by. I had no idea I was watching a 2.5-hour movie. It is wow. Utterly thrilling. You're getting something new every 10 minutes. It's fantastic.
Interesting.
In Mike Flanagan, I trust. I will get in his car. He can take me anywhere. I want to watch the 3-hour cut of Ouija: Origin of Evil.
Dude, I love Mike Flanagan. We need to get Mike Flanagan on the show sometime. I think that needs to be our next big goal.
Yeah, when GJ was like, I have 4 movies on Netflix. I think I had more movies on Netflix than anybody. What about Mike Flanagan? That man, everything he's ever done ends up on Netflix.
All right, Steven, I think you had one more thing. You had 3 things to say about this.
I promise. This will be super quick. So it's very interesting which films are being talked about in the zeitgeist right now because of COVID. We don't have movie theaters. We just have drive-ins. And this IFC Midnight movie called Relic that maybe you guys have heard of has been getting a lot of press. And it's a film that I feel like would have been buried in any other summer release season. But it's getting a lot of reviews now because it went to VOD. I think it's playing some drive-ins. I think Chris mentioned to me the other day that he was thinking of going to see it. This is an Australian film about it's got Emily Mortimer, who I absolutely love. She and her daughter go to check on her mother, her aging mother, and she's disappeared. And they file a missing persons report. The mother comes back, but she doesn't seem quite the same. It's kind of an allegory for dementia, but it takes some pretty interesting thematic and stylistic twists and turns throughout. It's very interesting in the way that it explores mental illness as a supernatural concept. And I quite enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it's, with like in the spooky old people genre, it's a slight cut above what you'd normally get. But I would recommend that, maybe don't rent it, but if you can see it at a drive-in, I think this would be a great kind of B-movie thrill ride that'll leave you with a slight emotional gut punch at the end that you wouldn't expect otherwise from this kind of fare.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that, and I'm really curious to see it. I don't have much to report myself. I've been moving for the last week or so I've had almost no time for anything. However, I'll just, take another opportunity to plug Hannibal, which is now on Netflix, starting watching the second season, rewatching, I should say, the second season. And I do feel now a little ahead of my time in multiple ways because I watched Hannibal in the first place when it was on air, loved it. And then for some reason earlier this year, by odd coincidence, we rewatched the first season before it hit Netflix. And now that it's on Netflix, I feel like I keep seeing all these pieces saying, Hannibal is the, cult horror TV classic that everybody should be watching on Netflix. So I feel, duly ahead of my time now for having gotten to Hannibal before everybody else did twice. So that's my big hipster moment of the week.
You're so hip, Patrick. You're so hip. That's a fucking great show, though. I still need to watch the final season, but I've heard it's diminishing returns.
Yeah, my memory is that the second and third seasons were a steep downhill climb from the first, but that's an uncommon opinion I had of it. I think people generally like the second and third seasons, and I have been liking the second on this rewatch, so we'll see how it continues to stick with me. But let's switch gears.
Wait, I'm back. I got one more thing. I also watched the Beach House on Shudder.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
It was it was decent. I wouldn't tell you to go out of your way to see it, but if you're interested, you could do worse. There were some things I liked, some things I didn't like. Your mileage may vary. But what's interesting is Shudder came out with that a couple weeks ago, and then they just came out with another movie called Lake of Death, which looks just like The Beach House.
It does. It looks almost identical if you play those trailers on top of each other.
Yeah, it's kind of cute that it's like an Armageddon Deep Impact situation on Shudder.
Well, they're feeling those summer vibes, It's summertime. Yeah. You go down to the lake house, you go to the beach house,
Yeah, it's like you go to the cottage, you get, you have some beers, you go out on the water, hopefully not in that order, and then you're winding down at the end of the night, and you're like, let's just watch a movie where some stuff comes out of the water and kills people.
So the lake house, that's like a viral outbreak movie, right?
It's a meditation on extremophile forms of life.
Oh, extremophile.
Okay. Extremophiles are those organisms that thrive in extreme environments. And our hero in the beach house is a young college student who's like trying to go to grad school to study such organisms, but she ends up getting a little bit of a real life study, I guess, in the material.
They maybe should have called it like the Cliff House or something if that's the case. Like the beach house just sounds so tame and generic.
Well, I could second guess movie titles all day, and I'm sure I will as we get into our discussion of the movie we watched this week.
Totally.
It takes place in 1920, man. I mean, mostly.
But like think of a period piece. Like, what if Barry Lyndon was called like, I don't know, like 1676 or something. Like I don't know when that takes place.
Yeah, but I mean, it is interesting that there are so many very evocative titles that you could give this film, and especially the third installment that we watched, 1920 London, Fear Strikes Again. At least that tells you something. At the very least, it tells you horror period piece. But this is just, here's a year.
Not a year that anyone associates with anything, much less associates with this event, which didn't happen and is about ghosts in the haunted mansion.
But were there like notable events that we're just ignorant of in India in 1920? Maybe this date does have more significance if you're Indian.
The movie gets into it, and this is not a spoiler, but the residents of India revolted against the British colonists, but I don't know if that was specific to that year.
But that was in that was in the 19th century.
Oh, that's right. That was the flashback.
There's a flashback to that, so it's like maybe this movie is set in 1920 because they wanted to play off of that event, and then for story reasons they decided this one had to be set in the 1920s. I don't know. I think maybe they were just really proud because I know, according to Wikipedia, the director was proud to have created such a ambitious period piece horror film, which was somewhat unique. So maybe giving it the year as a title was meant to emphasize that.
So let me try and give it a quick Chris style, efficient setup here of our plot summary. Essentially, the events of the film revolve around a house, a giant old British style mansion that seems to be haunted. An architect comes into it in the opening scene who is supposed to demolish it and turn it into a hotel. He gets fucked over by some ghosts and is dispensed with and forgotten about very quickly. And then we spend most of the film focusing on his successor, who's a young man recently married to his wife, and they move in and are subsequently also haunted because the ghosts in the mansion don't seem to be too happy about the plan to demolish it. And that's basically the setup for all 2 hours and 24 minutes of 1920.
That's pretty succinct, and yeah, that's it. I don't know, man. It takes a long time before this really picks up interest. Before things start to get spooky. And when things are spooky, they're spooky indeed. But it is few and far between until the final act, which is effectively almost an hour of this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So 1920 London, Fear Strikes Again, for the uninitiated, the thing we all loved about it was Jay. We talk about Jay all the time. We've got the fucking music cue. He's a delightful exorcist character who is just enjoyably really badass. But Jay doesn't show up until the halfway point of that movie, And
no, that's not true at all.
what? Jay doesn't show up until later into the movie, right?
Jay shows up like 20 minutes into that movie.
What happens there's something that happens at the halfway point of Fear Strikes Again.
The halfway point, well, there's the intermission where you find out Jay's true intentions and Jay's ultimate betrayal.
But Jay's been there for a while at that point.
Oh, that's right. Okay. The one parallel that I did detect between the two, other than them both being Bollywood horror movies, is that suddenly things kick into some sort of higher gear about halfway through in a way that was somewhat shocking to me in both films.
Yeah, that's true.
That's fair.
Around the halfway point of this movie, things start happening. The spooky stuff escalates from just people walking around, looking at shadows in the dark, and very, that it's that same shit that I hate in every movie. People just walking through the dark, getting vaguely spooked. It's boring as hell. We got to do something about this. But then things do start picking up. They do not pick up like they pick up in 1920 London Fear Strikes Again, but they certainly pick up. The interesting thing is 1920 London Fear Strikes Again is kind of reviled. Like, people don't like that movie. Like, they're like, oh, well, like, that movie's not as good as 1920.
Are you fucking kidding me?
I disagree. I think 1920 London is a blast and very creative, and this movie seems well made but very rote, especially for us Western audiences that have already seen The Exorcist and everything. Like, this movie, our friend William Friedkin should be getting some royalties off of 1920.
yeah, totally.
For sure.
And Blatty as well.
There's a lot of questions about why this exists, and I'm looking at the filmography of Vikram Bhatt, who is the director of 1920.
Okay.
And if you look at his filmography on Wikipedia, he's made a whole bunch of movies since the 90s, but about half of them say in the notes that they're either inspired or based on popular Western movies. Well, semi-popular. Like, he made a movie called Germ that is based on Double Jeopardy, the Ashley Judd, Tommy Lee Jones thriller.
Oh, yeah.
He made a movie apparently based on There's Something About Mary, The Whole Nine Yards, What Lies Beneath.
Oh, my God. I want to see all of these.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So maybe that's just what he does.
What would What Lies Beneath be? Or Something About Mary with, like, musical numbers in them?
I mean, I think it more or less makes sense. I mean, our film industry certainly remakes all kinds of films from other countries, and I guess I'm not too surprised that Bollywood does the same thing with Western films. And I mean, certainly this isn't remaking The Exorcist word for word, but there are certainly elements clearly borrowed from The Exorcist.
I want to spend a little bit of time, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, about how this film looks. I mean, it was especially jarring after seeing 1920 London, which is like a pretty, by Bollywood standards and modern standards in general, like a pretty polished looking movie. This film, at times, like, I feel like they were actually using equipment from the 50s and 60s to shoot this. It looked like they were actually using, like, the makeup, lighting, and camera lenses of that era, which I thought was a really kind of cool choice for a period film. Obviously, there weren't many films being made in 1920, and those that were being made were pretty rudimentary and they were black and white, but I really appreciated the cinematography of this, that it did harken back to an earlier era of cinema, and that did lend it, like, it felt kind of transportive to me in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it looks like it was made in 1920 exactly, but it certainly looks like it was made much longer ago than 2008. And I'm not sure whether that's a deliberate creative choice or just the limitations of what they had to work with. But I appreciate the period detail in both the production design and also that feeling that this was a movie that came from an earlier era than 2008 when it actually came out, which made the occasional CGI effect look even more jarring and out of place.
Oh yeah, we've got like Casper and the Friendly Ghost CGI effects in this movie.
Oh yeah,
like I haven't seen a haunted house this dependent on like computer generated ghosts since Super Mario Brothers.
There's not that many computer-generated ghosts.
But it was pretty fascinating that, again, Patrick, I like what you said. I had this similar thought while watching this. I don't know if that was the limitations of what technology was available, but there were shots that looked like they were from like a Powell Pressburger movie, like The Red Shoes or something from the 50s. Like, and I if that was because of the limitation of available technology, whatever, it worked really well for me. I felt like it transported me to a different era in a way that I have not really ever seen in any other period piece.
I don't really know what you guys are talking about, to be honest. I didn't think it looked particularly unique. It did seem to be shot on film, and I thought that the cinematography was quite good throughout. But other than that, I didn't think there was anything that noteworthy about the look of it.
There's some I mentioned Barry Lyndon earlier, and not by coincidence. Like, that was a movie I thought of watching this a lot. There's a lot of, especially the outdoor stuff, is like really wide lenses, super gauzy looking, only natural light. They're not using any sort of studio lighting outdoors like you would normally do in a film in, the modern era or 2008.
There are a lot of dramatic, like resplendent kind of wide shots that look almost like a painting, and reminded me weirdly of Kubrick or something like that. I just kept going. I literally kind of caught myself a couple of times going, all right, 2008, what else came out in 2008? The Dark Knight came out in 2008.
Wow.
Whatever. I don't know. The Dark Knight is the first one that comes to mind for whatever reason to me. And I'm just like, this does not look like that. It just looks older for some reason.
Yeah, so it's got an interesting look to it. Your mileage may vary. I want to talk about the opening of this, before we get into anything more. I really enjoyed the kind of the prelude to this movie where the second architect who's involved with this mansion gets murdered by the ghost. I was into this immediately. Like, even though it was like, it's so like hoary and cheesy, like I've seen this in a million movies, like it was shot with such visual flair and it happened so quickly, like the way that he was haunted and died, that I was like screaming. I'm disappointed that I had to wait like another hour after that for more of this kind of action.
But can we go even earlier than that? I was just delighted that this movie, the very first thing you see before studio logos or anything, are two credits that say special appearance by, and I forget the actor's name, and then friendly appearance by. Yes. And, it's a translation thing, but I still just loved the expression friendly appearance by an actor. I love that.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought that up because that was my first note. And that's a little different from the translation errors that we see in the subtitles. Anybody can just update those subtitles at any time and send a new file to Netflix or what the fuck ever. Like, that credit was like printed on film.
Yeah.
Like, that was a real choice there.
Well, it's especially fascinating. And I mean, it may just be like a regional, a cultural thing, but we don't see any credits for the film for another several minutes, but we get these two credits for these two actors before anything else. I was just fascinated by that.
Yeah, I think that's just probably a distribution wart. Like, I think this movie has been altered since it was in the cinema of India. One of the things that makes me say that is that there's no intermission in it, unlike 1920 London, which famously has an intermission.
I missed that.
Most Bollywood films have an intermission. I know because I was tired. I was planning to go to bed at intermission, and then there was no intermission, so I just stayed up for the 2 hours and 20 minutes. But so I think this movie has gone through some editing, and it wouldn't surprise me if the opening credits got chopped or whatever before it made its way onto Netflix. Who knows? I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah, we've definitely seen Stranger, or at least equally strange, on Netflix.
But I don't know who those actors. I tried to Google them, but I wasn't really able to recognize them. But I was wondering if there was like a Scream sort of situation happening in this opening scene where we spend so much time with this man who's come to the house to build a hotel or whatever, and then he dies about 10 minutes or so into the movie. it's kind of shocking. And I was wondering if this was like a name actor or something, and that it was really a bait and switch sort of situation in the movie.
Could have been a Psycho situation, maybe that played better for local audiences, but I love that opening scene. I especially love that kill where the architect gets killed by flying ghost glass. Like the stained glass window just like shatters and the shards go flying into his body.
Oh man, that was some of the CGI that did not do it for me. I mean, that opening scene was fine. I don't think I did not respond to it the way you did. I'll put it that way.
Oh, I mean, okay, let's be honest. I sat down to watch 1920. Was I thrilled to watch this movie? Absolutely not.
Why not?
It felt like homework to me because I didn't even like 1920 London.
That's true. You did famously give it a screw it, I think.
Is that famous? But yes, I did give it a screw it. But I was like, all right, this is a bonkers, just kind of gonzo kill that I've never seen in a horror movie before. I was all in, and I didn't expect anything better than the CGI that we had before our eyes.
So I became fascinated very early on with our hero Arjun, who early on is like running away with his bride. He is seen early on. It's kind of unclear to me, and again, this may be a cultural thing that I may just be misunderstanding or failing to understand because I'm American, but he seems to be almost a monk or involved in some sort of holy pursuit early on, where he's just reciting these mantras, worshiping Lord Hanuman, who is one of the Hindu deities. And then he gives that all up. He says, fuck Hanuman, fuck God, I'm going away to be with my love, Lisa. And he gives this like monologue at one point because her dad stops them. Yeah, his dad stops them and he's like, fuck this, we're going to kill Lisa. You can't be with her. And he gives this like just old Hollywood style. This is another thing that really felt like a throwback to me. He just gives this like wide-legged, like big stance, like almost James Dean-esque monologue about how
Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart monologue about how he's renouncing God to be with his love. And I was like, oh, I'm all in for this.
Except you never see Jimmy Stewart renounce God in a movie like this.
It was shocking to me. And back to the look of this movie, that whole sequence where they get pulled over on the road looked like straight out of the Charlton Heston 10 Commandments. It was like early Technicolor, just like super classic Hollywood looking. I loved it. Loved every minute of it.
Yeah, the background is like this royal blue. It feels slightly unnatural and heightened in a weirdly organic way.
Yeah, it was a great scene, and it was so bonkers too. It's like, he's trying to elope with Lisa, and it goes against his whole family tradition because she is of mixed ancestry, British and Indian together, which is very controversial in his family, I guess, and culturally. There may also be a religious element to it. His dad and a bunch of his dad's goons stop him and try to tie her up to a car and set the car on fire, which is kind of a strange way to do it, but that's
whatever floats your boat.
He goes batshit. He gets jumped by like 10 guys and just starts fighting them like Neo. And then he basically says, you know what? I renounce my family and I renounce God and I'm going to be with Lisa. And then there's even a follow-up scene where he's with Lisa and she's like, so did you renounce God or what? He's like, you know what? Any God that serves these purposes and creates this suffering and tries to deny this and is used like this is not a God I want anything to do with. And I kept thinking about this, and we can't really have a full discussion about this till we get into the spoiler room, but for at least the vast majority of this movie, he is a really strong atheist hero. Yeah. And I was like, when have I seen this in a movie before? Never. Like,
let alone in an Indian film. I was so excited about that.
And like relatable, at least, to my sensibilities. I mean, I guess like Han Solo is maybe the closest example to like a avowed atheist hero, but it's like that's something you just don't see, like a staunch atheist where that's part of his character.
Well, in Han Solo, like we're we're dealing with a universe in which there's not like the traditional God that Christians believe in the Star Wars movies. So it's even more shocking just to see that kind of laid bare in like a realistic setting.
Yeah, but and it is laid bare only as setup to resoundingly repudiate that concept later on in the film.
Well, spoilers.
But it was still, yeah, spoilers. But it was still fun to see that moment. I mean, also being not quite an atheist, but close myself. It was fun to see that moment, and it was a little bit of a fist pumper for me.
It just made me wish that, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with all the diversity and inclusion that is in the cast of characters in the MCU, what if Captain America was just like, you know what? I'm an atheist. God doesn't exist.
I feel like there have been some anti-God statements in the MCU. I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, get back to me on that.
I feel like I should have an answer on that already, but
no, I guess we can't do Iron Man anymore, but he would have been a good candidate. But like Iron Man or Captain America, I want them to
wait. Why can't we do
God.
Iron Man anymore?
Spoilers. I can't say why we can't work with him anymore.
Oh, but I mean, he's still a potentially atheist character in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, but he never says so. He seems like he could have been.
You want a character to just like come out. You want fucking.
I want representation. I don't want this J.K. Rowling shit where it's like, yeah, that character was gay, but we only told you after the fact, and it never affected the character or the storytelling at all.
Yeah, you want like fucking Black Widow to just walk out and renounce God.
Yeah, and then like it's ridiculous, but yeah, I'm just trying to imagine.
All right. Well, anyways, they wind up at this house. I'm for some reason I'm struggling a little bit to talk about things prior to the twist. You know who I do like? You know who I liked was maybe my favorite character in this whole movie, who may even be the secret J of this movie, is Balvant.
Oh, who's that? Really? The Patsy servant guy?
Yeah, servant guy.
Yeah, the servant who is supposed to watch over the mansion for the like fucking rich fat cat owner of the mansion, and he knows shit is going wrong in the mansion. He knows there's a curse, but the owner tells him, don't fucking tell Arjun and Lisa about this because they'll bail. Here's some money, keep your mouth shut. And
it pays him off Michael Cohen style. It's crazy.
I was drawn in by that guy's performance. It was probably the most naturalistic performance in the movie for me. And I don't know, I enjoyed his character's struggle and just the way you could see that struggle in his face. And I don't know. I enjoyed it. I related to it.
He's a good actor. He's a very slight comic relief. Like his performance is a little bit more exaggerated than anyone else in the film.
Oh, I disagree. I think you're mixing him up with the like sort of cackling dude who welcomes the architect at the beginning. Or is that Balvant too?
That's him too.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, his performance and his character kind of evolve and change as the movie goes along.
Multitudes.
Because at first he's just like, he literally has this sort of cartoonish like ha 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 laugh, and later in the movie, I don't know. At least to me, he came off as a much more natural human character.
All right.
To the degree that even, I mean, obviously, I thought those were two separate characters, but it was the same guy.
I was fascinated with the priest, the horny priest, in this.
Horny priest.
Well, he asks Lisa if she's going to attend the Sunday Mass alone or with her husband, and then we start to understand that she's not feeling so great about the marriage, and she's feeling like she doesn't really like the guy that she's stuck with, and she sees what is it, like anger and love in his eyes at the same time for the first time, and is like creeped out by it. But I feel like the priest was coming on to her in that early sequence. I found that
no. The priest was saying, "Hey, aren't you going to come to church? Aren't you and your husband going to come to church?" And that scene is there so that we understand the tension between her as a woman of faith and him as a atheist hero.
He was trying to find out both her and her husband's religious beliefs and if they were
you've obviously never
joining
talked
the flock.
To a priest.
I was raised Catholic, and I've learned not to trust priests. I don't think I need to elaborate on that any further. So maybe that's why I'm bringing my own baggage into this. Maybe
if you ever go and you talk at that length with someone who leads a congregation, they often will ask you if you're going to come to the congregation.
I did not like the priest, but I guess I did find him interesting. It was an interesting performance.
There's so much more to talk about this movie. I mean, we're talking about a movie that's, 2 hours and 20 minutes and some change. It spans like 60 years, at least 2 religions, 4 families, 12 horses, 6 mansions. There's
just one mansion. What the fuck are you talking about?
All right, there's just one mansion.
One mansion that's the size of 6 mansions. This thing is massive.
3 mansion architects. There's so much to get into. I don't know if
2
we can
countries.
get into much more of it.
Certainly incorporates 2 countries.
Well, I think we've said enough before we review it. I mean, basically the gist is we kind of know what's going to happen. In the prelude, we see the second architect get killed by the ghost. We see this young, hopeful couple who have renounced religion and in favor of each other come in, and the husband is idealistic. He's going to demolish this thing, turn it into a hotel at the behest of the owner. The wife is having second thoughts, and then she starts seeing things that he isn't seeing in the place. She starts to become haunted. I feel like that's all we can really say before we dive into what this movie actually is.
Yeah, I just want to add, though, that I really liked that tension when it was there, and it only brought up a few times, the tension about, like, should we be demolishing this beautiful historic mansion to put up a hotel? That was an interesting idea, and they kind of debate it a couple times, and the husband is like, listen, it's only beautiful because you can't see the beautiful hotel that's in my mind.
Yeah.
And I really like that stuff. And maybe they were trying to get at a theme about, old versus new, tradition versus, modernity or whatever.
That's a big maybe, but I like where you're going.
It's a big maybe.
Yeah, I think
it's not important.
I think their minds were much more on themes of religion and the tension between Britain and India, but...
Well, that ties
in. That ties in perfectly with what Chris is saying.
Yeah.
But I just don't think that...
Damn it, I just made Chris's point for him. Fuck.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you bring in, like, all the, like, colonialism elements. We're talking about an old mansion, which I don't know who owned the mansion, but, it's basically going to become a hotel for tourists,
This movie is trying to reconcile the trauma of the past with the new ways of the present being 1920.
Well, and speaking of movies that this movie references / rips off, and also speaking of a movie that we already talked about once today, this gave me big Shining vibes. I mean,
oh yes, totally.
a hapless couple sort of temporarily taking care of a mansion and a house that they really don't have a clue the full extent of its malevolence. Big Shining vibes.
Big Shining. I've wrote that in my notes. I felt that too. I don't feel like it really paid off on that, but that certainly seemed to be an influence.
He's staying at the hotel to do a job, and they're there for an incredible length of time, but we never really see him working on anything.
And
right.
he seems to be, I mean, he doesn't go mad, but he becomes different from the woman sorry, let me recast that. He becomes different from the man she fell in love with, and she notices changes in him and starts falling out of love with him and distrusting him. That's very Shining.
Something else I found out on Wikipedia is that the director of this movie, Vikram Bhatt, he stepped away from the franchise, but he returned in 2018 to direct 1921.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Same shit, different year. And the poster for 1921... This is hilarious. The tagline for 1921 is "A decade after 1920."
What?
What?
Yes.
Was it a literal decade in real time since those movies had come out?
Yes.
No
That's
way.
why it's that. So it came out in 2018, 10 years after 1920. But to call it 1921, a decade after 1920, amuses me to no end.
I love it. I'm fascinated, though, that this has become a franchise, despite the fact that, I mean, judging by the critical response from India, no one seems to like these movies that much. I mean, even the response to 1920, the original, was pretty mixed. And as we talked about, critics in India kind of dragged 1920 London, Fear Strikes Again. I forget what the second one, how that was received, but I don't think this has been a particularly well-received franchise, but it just keeps going. It's like fucking Tyler Perry.
Well, Patrick, I was going to say, that's a great example. If American cinema followed the opinions of critics, I don't think we'd have like 3 Trolls movies right now. And this movie, it was a success. It made over twice its budget.
It's a moneymaker.
Box office. Yeah.
It's a moneymaker. It's the Rush Hour of India. All right, well, let's review this fucking shit, and then we'll remove the doors from the spoiler room so we can get in there, and we'll talk about all the spoilers for this thing.
I want to go first. Can I go first?
Yeah, Chris, please, by all means.
All right, I'm going to give it a cue it. I was looking for a way to give it a view it because I thought that there were some elements of it that were a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, it is way too long for what it is. At least half of the movie is very uninspired. It's kind of just rehashing horror movie tropes that we've seen before, and that's not very interesting. There's some good spooks, there's some fun, there's some subplots that held my attention. It really picks up in the last 45 minutes or so for me. You could probably just watch the first 15 minutes and the last 45 minutes and have a good time with this movie, but it's the rest of it, you do not have to go there. So I'll give it a cue it.
Can I go next?
Yes.
I'm going to give it a screw it. I feel like there's maybe an hour of movie in this 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I've seen it before, and I've seen it done better. There's some interesting shit in here, though. Like, I will say, I'm not a huge fan of The Exorcist. Some of the possession stuff that ends up happening later in the film was actually like pretty unsettling in a way that I did not find The Exorcist to be on any of the numerous times I've watched it. But overall, this thing is just, it's too long. It's unfocused. I can see how, to an audience who is not familiar with the American, cinema horror tropes that we've been raised on, that this could be kind of exciting. But unless you're a Bollywood completist, I would not recommend seeking this thing out. Screw it. Patrick.
If you are a longtime dedicated EHMON listener and you are a 1920 London Fear Strikes Again aficionado, I guess I can give it a higher cue it. It's it's interesting. There are a few qualities to recommend it. I can't quite give it a view it though, because goddamn, it is draggy in stretches, and oh boy, that's a long 2.5 hours. So, either way, cue it. Anyways, we got to get down to the spoiler room and spoil everything. But before we go down there, it is my duty, as always, to remind you to go follow EHMONcast on your social media feeds. We're on all the social networks, whichever ones you like. Also go to every horror movie on Netflix.com. Click the merch store link, and you can get our t-shirts. You can get our sweet art on all kinds of different products, coffee mugs, whatever floats your boat.
Condoms.
We really got to get TeePublic on that. They got to get some condoms out there. And, of course, also go to your podcast provider of choice. Rate us, review us, tell your friends about us. It helps people find the show. And we like to see that stuff. It brightens our day. So help us out if you feel so inclined. All right. You gentlemen ready to go down to the spoiler room?
Let's see if that door opens this time of night.
Yeah, we better hurry up before someone turns it into a hotel.
Let's do it. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're down here in the spoiler room, and we're about to spoil everything about 1920. But first, we completely forgot to mention a very EHMON relevant note at the top of the show that since we saw you last, we played the video game adaptation of the last movie we reviewed, Don't Knock Twice, which shockingly has a video game adaptation.
Yeah.
Who fucking knew?
I want to see video game adaptations of Anti-Birth. I want to see Anguish have a video game adaptation.
No.
Maybe that could just be like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I love Patrick, like in a sleepy community.
Just try not to get hit by the fucking car. That's your goal.
I could go all day. I mean, I want to see At the Devil's Door. I want to see all this.
I want to see Atu Blanco.
I want to see G.J. Eckternkamp's The Car: Road to Revenge, the game.
Oh my God, yes! And you play the car, and you're trying to get the sympathy of your ex-girlfriend.
I was thinking it would be like multiplayer, and you could play as one of the 4 henchmen. Like you could be Ash, Crash, Slash, or Burn, or whatever their names were.
Colt.
You play as the car. You play as the car, and you drive around trying to hit as many people as you can. But if you hit too many people, the sympathy meter goes down of Bay. So you have to balance your bloodlust with the sympathy of Bay.
Well, all these ideas sound so much more exciting than Don't Knock Twice the game was. It took about, I don't know, an hour or 2 hours or something to play, and you just walk around and gather shit, and then there's a very anticlimactic ending. And it's definitely optimized for VR, which we did not play it in.
But it looks like shit. I mean, the graphics are terrible, especially considering this game cost $20. $20 on the PlayStation
Out of
Network
my
store.
pocket.
Out of your pocket.
20 bones.
And
20
Patrick
big
literally
ones.
finished it, and Patrick just immediately deleted it dramatically.
Did I?
Yes.
I completely forgot that I did that.
He, like, rage deleted it as soon as it was over.
Oh my God. So if I wanted to play that again, I would have to buy it again now.
No, you still own it. You'd have to download it again.
Oh, okay.
So
fine.
So we can play again and get the good ending next time.
Awesome. I can't wait.
Yeah, there's 2 endings, apparently. We're going to do it. And also apologies to anybody who tried to watch our live stream video of that occasion, because apparently the audio was not super great, but it'll be better the next time that we play a video game adaptation of one of the films that we watch.
It wasn't my fault. I'm not apologizing.
Speaking of things that don't work out, let's talk about the ending to 1920. I don't even know if that's a great segue, because, I guess things work out okay in the end.
Depends on your views about faith.
Yes,
it does depend on your views about faith. Let me just hit the plot points of this.
Do things work out in the end? It depends on if you're Jesus Christ or Lord Hanuman.
Exactly. Okay, so it's kind of funny how we were a little bit coy about that. We kept talking about how this movie riffs on The Exorcist, but we didn't really. We were very coy about the fact that Lisa gets fucking possessed. That's basically what the movie's about. So,
and I just want to say, like, if you read about this movie at all online, just looking for like a brief synopsis, it's like very casually referenced that this movie is like inspired by The Exorcist. So, like, I knew for a fucking hour and a half of this movie that she's going to get possessed, and it doesn't happen until the last 15 minutes.
Well, that's why I don't read stuff before I watch these movies, because I wasn't expecting it. And that's when things really picked up for me. It's a haunted house movie for half the runtime. Then at about the halfway mark, our atheist hero, our June, finds Lisa possessed. I don't have to tell you what that means. You know what it means. She's possessed. They do everything. I don't have to tell you what they did. They went to the hospital. They tried the medical solutions. They tried the religious solutions. It didn't work. So the twists and turns come when we figure out the history of the house. So basically what happened is 60 years prior to 1920, you can do the math on that one, during one of the revolts in India between the Indian nationals and the British colonizers, there was a family that lived in the house, most notably Gayatri a beautiful, I don't know how old she would be at the time, but, young woman. We know her because she has a 10-foot portrait on the wall in the creepy piano parlor that's been walled off from the rest of the house.
We hear her voice several times throughout the film. It comes out of a phonograph at one point repeatedly.
Yeah, we hear people saying her name, etc. Anyway, Gayatri and her family took in a British Indian defector who were returning from war. Long story short, and this is high drama. This was one of the actually most interesting segments of the movie for me. We find out that he actually isn't a defector, that he's actually selling out all the Indian soldiers on behalf of the British.
He's a spy.
So a bunch of Indian
spy.
That's a better way to put it. He's just a fucking spy, piece of shit. So he gets a spy's death. He is hanged in the piano parlor by out of revenge. But he and Gayatri had a little bit of a fling. A fling motivated largely by Gayatri trying to stall him and distract him for the cavalry to show up and hang him. And so in his dying breaths, he swears revenge on Gayatri. Now it's 60 years later, and coincidentally, Gayatri grew up, got old, died on the same day that our hero Lisa was born, and she is the reincarnated spirit of Gayatri.
Oh, yeah. So there's so many things to dig into out of what you just talked about, but I think it's worth noting that all this takes place, we learn all this in a flashback that lasts, at least a half hour. Like, this is a lengthy section of the film. We live with these characters. We get to know these characters in this flashback. It's no, brief in and out kind of thing.
Oh yeah, this is not. This is lengthy. This is a mini movie.
It does feel like it's from another movie, and I found it to be exhaustive and exhausting. Like, there's no reason that couldn't have, like, in a movie like this. I'm not a fan of, like, just kind of blatant exposition, but I rather would have had some of that so we could speed things up a bit.
That said, the storytelling in that half hour is so much tighter than in the rest of this 2 hour, 20 minute movie.
It is, but the rest of this movie didn't really set me up to appreciate that kind of storytelling.
And it was interesting. And the spy character is creepy. He kind of looks like, I don't know, David Blaine crossed with Jeff Goldblum. He's got this, like, natty, curly hair coming down over his face. He's got these eyes that look like he's got an evil soul.
He's got a limp, like a fake limp, like he's been injured in the war.
I actually kind of liked this sequence too. I just liked the ambition of it, of just delving into this sort of character-rich, lengthy flashback explaining how this all came to be. And, Stephen, you said that you felt the rest of the movie didn't set you up to enjoy this. I almost kind of felt like it did, along the lines that Chris mentioned. There wasn't this kind of depth or, relative richness in the rest of the film. And so when I got it all of a sudden, it was almost like a weird little treat, despite the fact that I was starting to get a little tired with the overall running time at that point. I found it a really interesting and, truly ambitious sort of diversion from the main event.
But man, like, okay, I love hearing that you guys really enjoyed this, but Jesus Christ, an hour and a half into a movie suddenly switches gears and shows you something that they could have told you in, like, 3 lines of dialogue. I was so fucking pissed. So pissed. I can appreciate it like disconnected from the rest of the film, but like that's like some of the worst pacing I have ever encountered in a movie in my life.
No, I love it. And you know what? This is one of the great things about watching every horror movie on Netflix. And, this isn't our first trip to Bollywood on this show. So it's like, I feel like we're kind of desensitized to some of the stylistic things that happen in these Bollywood movies. But, like, that's something you would just never see in your movie watching life, if not for movies like this. Like, yeah, again, it could have been 3 or 4 lines of dialogue, but I'm so glad it wasn't. They're just like, oh, wait, here's a flashback. Settle in. We're going to tell you a fucking tale.
It takes a half hour. You've already settled into you've already experienced the length of a normal movie. Now, if you can find a way to get deeper into your couch, please do so.
But if I run the thought experiment where, Arjun goes to see the old woman who lived these events 60 years ago, and she just tells him this story in 3 lines. I don't care. We've talked so many times before about how these things are less interesting when you just explain them in some dialogue. And, I guess ostensibly it's not really that different to explain it in a 30-minute flashback, but I enjoyed it a lot more. And I was like, okay, this actually feels like there's a reason for this to have happened. And I actually care about this situation more as a result, rather than just going to see the magical old woman explain why the haunting has been happening.
And the drama of the past informs the drama of the present, and it kind of increases the stakes for the finale of the movie.
I just want to say, if this movie had had an intermission like the other 1920 movie we reviewed on the podcast,
it probably did before it got into Netflix.
That wasn't my experience with it, though. But if it had, it would have... I would know that, like, all right, I can take a break, or I can finish this tomorrow and expect like kind of a different vibe when I get back into it. Instead, I watched this whole thing front to back in one sitting, and it just did not play well. And you guys are saying you cared more about the origin of the ghost after seeing that. I cared less. I just found it to be kind of banal and boring, this explanation.
I mean, look, if you want to add your own intermission, do it around like the hour 15 mark to the hour 18 mark when she's first getting possessed and the priest is seeing stigmata in the window, but before they go to the doctor's office. That's your intermission. Pretend you hear the J stinger and it says intermission. All right, so let me tell you what happens though after we get this huge exposition dump. It's pretty simple. Basically, they have a showdown. There's an artificial.
Actually, I have one more like big thing. If we're kind of moving sequentially, can I throw in one other big point about the flashback sequence? So the other thing that really threw me off, and obviously these movies, Bollywood movies, stop dead for musical numbers, and they're of varying quality. It's just the way things work. But the musical number where Gayatri was sort of romancing / seducing the evil spy with the intent of basically kind of running out the clock until the cavalry arrived, as Chris put it.
Yeah.
It was really weird to me because you have this sort of sweet pop song about love. And so often these songs in this movie and other Bollywood movies that we've seen very explicitly explain what the characters are thinking. And this song is basically just a love song, a love ballad. But there's... I don't think we're supposed to think she's in love with this guy. She's leading him on. That's the whole point.
I mean, it's tantamount to rape, practically.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
It's like, this is, and like her eyes are, tearing up when she closes the bedroom door to bang this guy. But yeah, you're right. The lyrics are pretty,
Well,
generic.
Patrick, I'm so glad you brought that up because we haven't talked about any of the musical numbers in this movie, and they're all superfluous. The musical numbers in 1920 London, like, at least feel like they kind of pause the story, but like slightly move it forward, or at least like give you moments to like indulge in how the characters react to each other and how they feel about each other. In this movie, they're all like, it just feels like filler. Like, I love the Scorpion song, but also like that entire scene did not need to be in the movie, where Arjun goes on a business trip and sees a belly dancer with his colleagues, and she's talking about how, like, I don't know, the scorpion's venom gets into you and you feel the poison and it makes you crazy or something. Like, I was expecting him to like full on cheat on Lisa in that moment. That would have been dramatic. It would have been interesting.
Oh, that would have been great.
It would have been, I wouldn't say great, but it would have been interesting. It doesn't happen. It's a cool song, but like that whole thing didn't even need to exist. And that's how I felt about it.
Maybe that's where it was going.
I think
but they left it on the cutting room floor.
I think that's in keeping with the mores of this movie and perhaps of the culture as well, though. I mean, I don't think you need to have him have sex with the belly dancer to get that he's sort of tempted outside of his marriage.
But he's uncomfortable. He's visibly uncomfortable the entire time. I agree with you, Patrick, and I was like really paying close attention to this scene, and like he like tells his friends like, "Yep, go dance with her, and he looks like he just doesn't want to be there the whole time." So I was like, why are we even seeing this?
I don't know. My read was that he was tempted by the fruit of another. That was what I was feeling anyway. But yeah, the musical numbers, sure, absolutely superfluous. But I think, that's what happens. They're always superfluous in these movies, and honestly, musical numbers are superfluous in 85% of the American musicals that you see too. I mean, that's one of the things that pisses me off about musicals. I love the basic concept of a musical, but so often the actual musical numbers do very little to advance the plot and are just there to have another fucking song.
Music Man, nothing. Every number advances the plot in the Music Man.
Actually, haven't seen the Music Man.
Umbrellas of Cherbourg. The whole thing is a musical, and every line of music advances the plot.
Okay, well, I'm not saying... I mean, obviously, yes, there are musicals that I love where the music does advance the plot, but so many... I mean, have you seen a fucking Rodgers and Hammerstein musical before? Like, so many of the great American musicals just stop dead to drop in a musical number. Also, Umbrellas of Cherbourg is not American, but...
French. French.
I love the concept of musicals, just so often the music is superfluous. This movie, let me put it this way, this movie made me long for the musical numbers of Booth.
Well, okay, yes, absolutely. And the musical numbers in this are more like music videos that are like they're like promotional tie-ins to the movie that like might have been released on like India's version of like VH1 or something.
Yes.
To promote it.
Well, I mean, it part of that is because the actors are not actually singing the song.
That's true.
I think
it's super weird.
If I remember correctly, like in a Boothnath, one of the reasons, there were 3 reasons that Boothnath's numbers like hit with me, and it's because 1, the actors are singing the songs sometimes, 2, they're interestingly staged, and 3, the music is actually catchy. The music in this was not memorable. They were not interestingly staged, and the actors are not singing them. So it's just like, we're just stopping watching music video.
Disagree. I agree with you for all of that, and those are fantastic points. The one point where I would disagree with you, and this is why I wrote this in my notes, the Scorpion song with the belly dancer is actually sung by the belly dancer.
Yes,
and
you're right.
And the song is catchy as fuck. The rest of the movie, it's just like, it's like what you see when you go to like a Korean karaoke place and you pull up a Tom Petty song, and it's just a video of like two sad Korean people with umbrellas in the rain feeding ducks that have nothing to do with the song itself.
As Running Down a Dream plays.
That Scorpion number is sensational, though. I mean, I agree that all the other ones are pretty shoddy, but the Scorpion one, I mean, it looks like they spent more money on that than half of the movie put together. You got, the choreography is amazing. You got hundreds of people in the frame. You got, fire. You got sets. You got it's fantastic. I thought it was animated when I first saw it.
Wow. You thought it was animated?
It looked like something from a cartoon. The reality is so heightened. The camera movement.
Ralph Bakshi was rotoscoping, did some real magic there.
Oh man!
God bless
it was fine.
God bless the Scorpion song. But let's move on and get down to the fucking meat of this climax of this movie, because it's not long after we find out the backstory of what went down in the revolt with our spy friend, that Lisa's possessed. It's all hands on deck to try to save her. There's some artificial time deadline enforced, like, by the time the clock hits midnight, the devil will have her soul forever. You know how that goes. Anyway. So we have, our atheist hero. We have the priest, who we're sure is going to save the day. That's basically it. The caretaker is there too. He doesn't have a lot to contribute to the effort. And some of this exorcism stuff is just truly sensational.
Yeah.
We got beds floating, she's floating, she's spooky.
She's making
a lot of it is kind of pulled from the
gurgling noises, and like we see her like upside down at different points with her like makeup around her eyes. Like, it's truly creepy, I would say.
Dude, she fucking eats a cat. That's one of the moments that I feel like will just haunt me and will stick in my head. Like, I think one of the first times we see her sort of possessed, she's crouched on the stairs with her eyes bugged out, just sort of like giggling to herself, eating a fucking cat or some kind of animal.
It's a raccoon.
I don't know. But it's a raccoon.
It's creepier than anything in The Exorcist. Like, that scene is just so fucking bizarre. It's like the movie Houseu, the Japanese kind of bonkers weirdo horror movie. It was like something from that, but played serious, and it chilled me.
Anyway, and so it's really unsettling. But here's the interesting thing: the priest does his best and basically just gets fucked. The priest dies, or he gets mortally wounded, and then he's never seen again.
So he dies,
and and so then it's basically just a showdown between possessed Lisa, and our hero, our atheist hero, and sensational action in the foyer of this mansion. She's floating up the pillars. She's going upside down. Has telekinesis. She's got the demon voice. It's amazing. Long story short, he realizes that he just can't physically get this demon out of her, so he's a broken man, and he decides he's going to unrenounce his faith, and he becomes devout again, and he hugs her, and he starts doing his chants again, and drives the demon out that way. And what a beautiful story.
Well, and thematically, I was fascinated actually by the priest just getting blown the fuck out, because I thought this movie was setting us up for, okay, he renounced Hinduism, now we've got the priest coming in, so the overall idea is going to be, all right, well, Christianity is the true way. But no, the priest gets fucked up, and the true hero of the movie is Lord Hanuman. The moral of the story is she should have stuck with Hinduism.
It makes sense with the colonialist, the criticism of colonialism in this movie, that would be the case.
Yeah, but it's funny because the priest is not he may represent colonialism, but he is a good guy. There's nothing unsavory about his character through the whole movie, other than that his technique.
Well, he's praying to the wrong god. He's a good guy, but he's got the wrong god.
But I thought that was kind of weird. Like, I was thinking of, in America, if you had the same sort of story where someone was like, you have Kevin Sorbo renouncing Christianity, and then, there's like a Muslim cleric or something who tries to help him with a problem and just gets killed, and then he finds God again and saves the day. Wow. Christianity is like 2% of India's population or something. So it's kind of like dunking on a pretty small minority there, but that's fine, I guess. Whatever. I can tell you that I can imagine like a devout Hindu audience loving this shit. I was almost standing up out of my chair cheering when he starts doing the chants again, and drives out the demon. So I can only imagine what it would mean to me if I were actually invested in that faith.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously I was hoping for, somebody needs to make a good atheist possession movie where there's just an atheist hero who's like, fuck all this, dogma bullshit. We're going to cast out the demon without crosses and Jesus prayers.
We're just going to use
whatever.
Science. We're going to be Matt Damon. We're going to be Matt Damon in The Martian, but we're going to be driving out a demon.
I don't remember shit about The Martian, but I'm sure that's a dank joke if I did.
We've talked about in the Devil and Father Amort episode about how I just I'm not fundamentally scared by possession stories because it's all just like fairy tale nonsense to me. So I like that. I like the idea of like the possession is real, but it's atheists dealing with it, and they have to kind of like confront the fact that they've like resigned themselves to not having any sort of faith, and yet it turns out that might be important.
Doodly 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 doodly.
Exactly. There we go.
Somebody do the whistle, because I can't.
I don't do music on the show.
Thank you, Stephen.
Anyway, yeah, it's beautiful, and like she's levitating, he's grabbing onto her feet. The camera works terrific. It's a very the climax of this movie gets your pulse pounding. I don't care who you are.
Yeah, there's some good effects, good possession shit.
It's thrilling.
It's good. It's good. It's fine. It's great.
And then like the falling action is them like reconciled, you know, they're leaving the mansion, and then just like a hilarious and somewhat unnecessary shot of someone wheeling out the 10-foot portrait of Gayatri on a cart.
Oh, yes. Just wobbling on the back of the cart as the credits roll. Great. A film. I feel even better about this now that we've talked about the whole thing, now that I've relived it in full. Maybe I'll revise my rating to view it.
But you know what? Like, I'm a hopeless romantic. Me seeing a guy and it's his wife, and we know what he's given up in his life to be with this woman, and she's possessed by a demon that doesn't just want to possess somebody, but is trying to destroy her specifically because she's the reincarnation of the woman who killed him. And, you know, is compelling her to like cut her own wrists up in front of him. That's compelling to me. That's more compelling to me than like The Exorcist, where it's like some like, you know, 8-year-old girl that I barely know who's just like in a bed puking.
Right. And not to like beat this horse to death all over again, but I feel like it wouldn't have that resonance to me if not for the weirdly long flashback sequence.
That's our movie pretty much. Very weird payoff that I wasn't expecting by the end of this thing.
It was just so bizarre to me because and you should have seen it coming. And I was wondering, I was like, is this guy going to take back his faith? Is that what that's about? But there's so much misdirection, especially with the Catholic character, that I was like, maybe this is just, I should have known better. But I thought maybe this guy's just going to be an atheist for the whole movie.
I thought so too. I thought, wow, this is really kind of transgressive and progressive, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, so it was a little disappointing to see the reversion, but I mean, I also still, like I said, I was still cheering when he started doing the chants again.
Well, and you know what? More power to it for sort of making me go on as much of a journey as far as its themes and what it was trying to say about religion as it did. Because at first I was like, oh, really? Are we making sort of a bold pro-atheist statement? And then I was like, oh, no, actually, we're saying Christianity is the one true way. And in the end, it's a pro-Hindu statement. But, you know, again, credit to it, I guess, for committing as hard as it did to those sort of thematic twists and turns.
Sure, it feels a little bit like propaganda to me in the end. But I did appreciate the misdirect and the surprise at the end, even if I was a little bit disappointed by it.
I should watch more Christian films. I should watch some Kevin Sorbo
some Left
movies.
Behind.
Yeah, like I like my. There's probably some that are as you know, kind of, I guess, uplifting as this. I feel like the climax of most recent Christian films is just like, well, we got that guy fired from the school board, you know, or whatever.
You've seen enough horror films. You need to go deeper now into true terror.
Oh, Chris, if you want to see some Christian horror films, there's a quadrilogy that I know of that's on Amazon right now. We'll talk off cast. Sounds fascinating.
Okay, great. Well, what the hell are we watching next week?
There's a lot of good stuff on Netflix right now. I think we're going to go with Vincenzo Natali's Splice, a film that came out quite a while ago. Looks kind of kinky. I kind of Cronenbergy. I was interested in it when it came out, and it just kind of fell off my radar. But I just today was listening to him on I guess, shout out to another podcast. He was on Best Movies Never Made, and he was discussing his script for an adaptation of J.G. Ballard's High Rise that never got made, and it's a pretty fascinating listen, and it made me want to dig deeper into his filmography.
So this was actually on my list of picks last time. I actually saw this in the theater.
Wow.
And I'm curious to revisit it because I remember feeling sort of a bit underwhelmed based on the reviews at the time, but still enjoying it. And I'm curious to see how it sits with me. Probably, a fucking decade later? This has to be a 10-year-old movie at this point.
Wow, this came out just under a year after 1920, actually. So let's see how it holds up.
Wow, so it's more than a decade old.
Yeah.
Is Vincenzo Natali someone I'm supposed to know?
He directed the first Cube movie. He did In the Tall Grass, the Stephen King Joe Hill adaptation on Netflix recently. That was kind of his return to fame after Splice sort of failed at the box office.
He directed 6 episodes of Hannibal.
Oh, shit.
Really? Wow. Really connecting the dots here.
Full
All right.
circle.
Well, that's good to know.
He directed 7. He solved a cold case once.
Nice. Okay, so he's been active. That's great.
Wait, do you mean he actually directed one of the episodes of the show you've been watching?
No, I mean he solved one. I'm just fucking around.
Oh, okay. Well, you trolled me well, Chris.
Well, I will have to find out what episodes of Hannibal he directed and bring that perspective to the table next time. Very excited to watch Splice. So excited that you picked it. And I think that wraps us up for this week.
Yeah, just about. It's not a horror movie, but if you haven't seen Ex Machina, it's on Netflix. You should watch it.
Oh, I need to finally see that. Love Alex Garland.
Yeah.
Wait, what made you think of Ex Machina?
I was just looking at titles related to Splice on Netflix, and it came up.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And we're never going to cover it, but if you haven't seen it, you should see it.
Decent movie. Good movie.
Yep.
All right. Well, next time we'll be watching Splice. We hope you'll be there. And I guess that's it for this week. For every horror movie on Netflix, I'm Patrick.
I'm Chris.
I'm Steven.
And he's Jay. We'll see you next time.